Coach William Grazione here, and we have a phenomenal question about creatine. So thank you guys so much for those of you who liked the article that we just posted, the new lesson on carb cycling. We really appreciate that. My assistant James and I spent a lot of time creating that, putting out the concepts, and then obviously writing up that valuable piece of information for you guys to help you with your clients in the future. So the question here is about creatine. Now specifically, give me 1 second. I'm actually going to find out exactly what the question was. Client asked me a question about creatine that I've never heard and wanted to see your thoughts. His question was, if I take creatine and drink a lot of water, will I get hydrated or more dehydrated because of water getting pulled into the muscles more with creatine? I've never heard that question and don't know how to answer. So it's interesting, right? Because the way that he asked it was actually relatively confusing. A few things to keep in mind here, and again, I'm going to scratch the surface of creatine monohydrate. And I'll first start off by saying that first and foremost, creatine monohydrate is the most researched sports performance supplement on the planet. It has more research done around it than any other sports performance supplement ever. So the sole purpose of creatine monohydrate is essentially to help you increase your phosphocreatine storage, or the creatine storage within your muscle. So obviously, you know, when we're doing things like resistance training, and let's just say for instance, you're doing a set of 10 on the bench press, you're doing a set of 10 or 20 or however many reps you're doing on squats, and it's a very high intensity activity, what happens is that you actually burn off phosphocreatine stores within your muscle. Now, theoretically, if we were to actually supplement with extra creatine, what that does is it actually increases our work capacity. So essentially, instead of you maybe being able to do 10 reps of a specific weight on a squat, maybe if you supplement creatine for a few weeks, you could essentially be able to squeak out 12, 13 reps. So you could understand that how over time that would naturally increase the volume, and then that would also increase the time under tension, which would then lead to increases in mechanical tension and metabolic stress, which could essentially lead to increases in cell swelling, which are the three basic concepts of muscle hypertrophy. So if we're doing all of those because we are supplementing creatine, it could lead to your ability to build more muscle mass. So the sole purpose of creatine monohydrate is to actually help you store intercellular fluid. So we all have muscles. Some of us have more muscle than others, but we all have muscle, right? Now, if I was to start taking creatine, what would essentially happen is that the muscle would fill with more fluid because there's more creatine being stored inside the muscle, okay? Now, one of the downsides with the usage of creatine, specifically creatine monohydrate, is that a lot of people overuse the amounts. So let's go ahead and get one thing certain and very clear right here, right now, is that the recommended amounts will vary depending on the amount of lean body tissue that a specific athlete may have. So what I've done for years, specifically with my female clients who may be, you know, anywhere from 110 all the way up to maybe 130 pounds, again, depending on how much muscle tissue they have, I'll either use anywhere from 2, 3, maybe all the way up to 3 to 4 grams, again, depending on how much muscle tissue this female has. If she's jacked, if she's a figure competitor, something like that, we're probably going to go on the better side of 4, sometimes maybe even 5 grams. Now, if we're talking about like a more muscular guy, let's just say we'll create a range here. So we'll say a smaller muscular guy, we'll probably start him at around 5. And then a more muscular guy, so now we're talking 180, 190, 200 pounds of lean body mass. There are times I've taken people like that up to maybe 6 grams, sometimes even 7 grams a day, with the understanding that eventually over the course of roughly 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks at times, your internal creatine stores are going to be at capacity, okay? So what does that mean happens to the rest of the water? Once your creatine stores are at capacity, there's no need to load any more creatine. The creatine is already being stored intercellular and there's no more to fill out. So therefore, what tends to happen when people overuse creatine is that the muscle cell's full. So any other fluid that's trying to find its way in, it can't. The muscle's full, it's at capacity. So what happens is that now you have this spatial layer between your muscle tissue and your skin called the subcutaneous layer. And what happens is that the water that can't be delivered into the cell actually spews out into the subcutaneous layer, which can actually make you hold more water. Now, based off of your own, genetic predisposition, you may store water in different areas than other people. Some people, their upper bodies kind of swell up and they look a bit puffier. Some other people may store water in like their lower back region or like their lower abs or wherever, but that's different depending on the person. So a few ways that we can bypass that is just use the recommended dosage that I told you about. So your client's question was a bit tricky, and it was, if I take creatine and drink a lot of water, will I get hydrated or more dehydrated? So if you take creatine and drink water, keep in mind that creatine needs water to be able to transport, okay? So creatine in a dry body, it can't go where it's supposed to go, right? Because there's no fluids to actually help shuttle the creatine into the muscle. But if you're obviously putting a lot of water, let's say maybe 3/4 of a gallon all the way up to a gallon a day for a male or a female, again, depending on size and all of that, the fluid amount per day may change a little bit. But as long as you're supplementing creatine with water, the water helps shuttle the creatine and get it where it's supposed to go. So you would be extremely better hydrated because this creatine is being shuttled into the muscle. I hope that answered your question, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Got somebody knocking at the door. I am out.